purposes of this presentation, I will try very hard not to speak Australian or lawyer, but you should know in advance that some of the terminology that's encountered in my research is less than ideal in order to accurately reflect the way that the law deals with the issues at hand. And before we go any further, I also need to let you know that I will be talking about genitals and alluding to some of the truly horrific things that can be done to them. I'll also be showing some pictures of genitalia in the nature of medical drawings only. Some of what I have to say or to show might make you uncomfortable or it might make you distressed. So please feel free to step outside if you need to at any time, including now. We're all good? Okay, let's talk about sex. For the most part, when the term sex is used, as opposed to the term gender rather than in its other meanings, it's referring to some fundamental biological categorisation. In the Australian context, traditionally, and in most discourses still today, sex is taken to be either male or female. But recent social understandings of sex and gender have broadened, leading most of us to grasp that it is plausible to be both male and female, or to be neither male nor female. At its most simple, the medicalised model of sex looks to what are often referred to as the 4 Gs. Genes, or the sex chromosomes, gonads, the internal reproductive organs, namely the ovaries or testes, genitals, the primary sex organs, and gender identity, which is the personal perception of the sex an individual feels themselves to be, that society perceives them to be, or that they behave as if they are, depending on who you're asking. Each of those can be exhibited as female, as male, as both female and male, or as neither female nor male. When they're all in alignment and female, medicine would label the individual a cisgender female. When they're all in alignment and male, medicine would label this individual a cisgender male. When the physical characteristics are in alignment, but the gender identity is not, medicine would label this individual as transgender. Where the physical characteristics are female, and the gender identity is both male and female, or neither male nor female, socially we would refer to the individual as genderqueer or non-binary, among a number of other terms. The same terms are used if the physical characteristics are male, but the gender identity is both or is neither. For every other combination of characteristics, the individual would be considered intersex. Intersex as a term has no singular definition. The context of the term's use can, but need not always, dictate the meaning. The most significant contexts for the use of the term in my research are legal, social, and medical. OII Australia, which is a leading Australian intersex activism and advocacy organisation, provides a socially functional understanding of intersex. Intersex, they say, is a term that relates to a range of congenital physical traits or variations that lie between the ideals of male and female. It is a spectrum or umbrella term rather than a single category. In 2013, amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act of 1984 in Australia provided our current accepted legal definition. Intersex status means the status of having physical, hormonal, or genetic features that are neither wholly female nor wholly male, or a combination of female and male, or neither female nor male. You'll notice here that our law refers to intersex as a status, which suggests that by this definition, one can both become and unbecome intersex. In the medical context, intersex has been passed as a pejorative term, and since 2006, the majority of medical literature instead, or as well, uses the term disorders of sex development, which is defined by congenital conditions in which development of chromosomal, gonadal, or anatomic sex is atypical. Intersex advocates and many intersex people understandably object to this unsubtle linguistic clinicalisation of intersex and its definition as a disorder. Queer theorists in the room will immediately recognise that the repercussions of disordering intersex are both tangible and highly problematic, and the outcome of labelling intersex as a medical disorder to be reordered stretches into the legal sphere as well. But more of that in a moment. Because of these differing definitions, it's difficult to ascertain the precise prevalence of intersex, but it's generally agreed that between 1 in 500 and 1 in 1,000 people has or is some form of intersex. Based on birth rates in Australia, this means that between about 300 and 600 intersex children are likely to be born each year. Here in the US, that equates to between 4 and 8,000. Statistics from Europe suggest that between 87 and 91% of medically recognised intersex children have at least one surgical intervention in childhood, usually before the age of 2, and many have over a dozen. In a 2015 study conducted on intersex people in Australia, Jones et al. Reported that 60% of self-identified intersex respondents have been subject to invasive medical procedures, with 115 genital or gonadal affecting surgeries reported by just 272 respondents. Medically speaking, intersex encompasses between 30 and 50 medically described conditions. Some of these can carry immediately life-threatening symptoms. Some feature symptoms that require medical attention in order to function in a life-sustaining manner throughout childhood. Treatment for these conditions is patently, urgently, and unequivocally required, and that falls outside the scope of any argument that I might be making here today. Some others, however, can result in a child being born with what is termed ambiguous genitalia, atypical sex characteristics, or variations of sex anatomy. That is, genitalia which are visibly neither wholly male nor wholly female. For many decades, ambiguity of genitalia was seen as a medical emergency. Today still, many medical protocols call for such genitals to be corrected. If not immediately, then preferably while the intersex child is under the age of 2. To determine when an intersex child's genitals are atypical, medicine uses tools such as the Prader scale, seen here. To the left, labelled no virilization, I've accidentally strayed into Australian spelling, mentally correct that, is what medicine deems to be wholly female external genitalia. In other words, a typical vagina. Stages 1 to 5 increase in virilization. In other words, they become increasingly representative of male external genitalia. This Prader scale is used to measure how masculinized a child's genitals are when medicine has determined this child to truly be a girl. Another commonly used tool is the Quigley scale. This time to the left, labelled stage 1, is what medicine deems to be wholly male external genitalia, in other words, a typical penis. Stages 2 to 6/7 increase in feminization, in other words, they become increasingly representative of female external genitalia. The Quigley scale is used to measure how feminized a child's genitals are when medicine has determined that child to truly be a boy. The binarist, not to mention heteronormative presumptions that underlie these classifications, are archaic, yet medicine clings to its own authority to determine sex and still asserts that a baby or toddler can simply be allocated male or female genitals, whereafter they'll probably grow to inhabit the sex that their genitals represent. Australian law, on the other hand, has led the way in gender recognition. Under the Australian Government Guidelines on the Recognition of Sex and Gender, all Australian government officials are obliged to collect and record sex as male, female, or X, denoting indeterminate /intersex /unspecified. Case law 2 confirms that Australian law readily accepts that a person may be other than male or female. Examining the process of binary sex assignment to intersex children in light of the 3 discourses, medicine sees the intersex child's body as deviant, as disordered. So it seeks to change that body to be normal and healthy. Medicine sees that process as corrective, as normalising, as reparative. Surgery fixes a body that arrived broken. Informed society sees the intersex child's body as a person, an intersex person with an intersex body. the medical and surgical processes that body is exposed to result in an intersex person with an approximation of a male or female body. Society sees that process as a non-consensual mutilation. Surgery injures a body and a mind that were intact and unmolested. Australian law sees that intersex babies are not children with no sex or sex identity. They're children with sex other than purely male or purely female. The process of surgically allocating a binary sex, then, is not a sex assignment, but a sex reassignment. So let's think reparatively. Medicine believes it's already repaired all there is to repair. It feels no obligation to uncorrect its correction and return the intersex child to, if you will, its natural state. Job well done. We've all saved a child from a life of confusion. Reparation of non-consensual mutilation encompasses two facets. Who would we look to in order to repair a bodily mutilation? A doctor. I've reversed them accidentally, sorry about that. And yet a doctor performed this mutilation in the first place. Who do we look to in order to repair a lack of consent? The law. And yet the remedies the law can offer for such a violation, punishment of a perpetrator, financial compensation, cannot unviolate a body or a mind. Because the law sees a sex reassignment, it might appear that it has nothing more to offer. But under Australian law, sex reassignment cannot legally be conducted on a child without direct and explicit consent given not by the child, not by their parents, not by the doctor, but by the court. To borrow from Justice McHugh, formerly of the High Court of Australia, under Australian law, every surgical procedure is an assault unless it is authorised, justified or excused by law. The most straightforward justification is that consent has been given for the procedure. If the patient is a competent legal adult, they can simply provide the consent for themselves. If the patient is a child, which in Australia means under the age of 18 or under the age of 16 in some jurisdictions, or is otherwise not competent at law, for example, by virtue of an inability to fully understand the procedure, consent can be given by their parent or legal guardian. However, there are some medical procedures for which parents cannot provide consent, and these are termed special medical procedures. Special medical procedures always require consideration by the Family Court of Australia. A special medical procedure is non-therapeutic, invasive, irreversible and major. It carries significant risk of making the wrong decision, either about the competence of the child or about the best interests of the child. And if such a wrong decision were made, the consequences would be grave. If we apply this threshold test to sex reassignment of intersex babies, all surgery is considered invasive by the courts, so it meets that test. Anytime a procedure involves discarding of functional tissues or significantly modifying the body, it's deemed irreversible, so it meets that test. All surgery is also considered a major procedure, so it meets that part of the test. A small child is certainly not competent to give consent, so there's really no likelihood of an error being made there. But there is enormous risk of making an incorrect decision on that child's behalf, so it meets that test. The consequences of that decision being incorrect are a loss of reproductive capacity, which is legally considered grave, and also the very real and extremely likely possibility that the child will later feel violated by non-consensual, highly impactful decisions having been made about their body, so it meets that test. All that leaves is for the procedure to be non-therapeutic. And here the medical definition comes back to haunt us. Because intersex is defined by medicine as a disorder, any purported treatment for intersex has been deemed legally therapeutic. This test is not met, and so the Family Court of Australia has found that sex reassignment of intersex children is not a special medical procedure, and parental consent alone is adequate authorisation. I argue that this finding is both inappropriate and incorrect. There are two paradigmatic procedures that are automatically recognised as special medical procedures in Australia: sterilisation and sex reassignment. When gonatal tissues are removed from children who are not intersex, the law in Australia requires that the family court, and only the family court, consider the child's case and determine whether the procedure can be conducted. When a trans child seeks sex reassignment via hormonal induction of puberty in their affirming sex, the law in Australia still requires that the family court, and only the family court, consider that child's case and determine whether the procedure can be conducted. But for intersex children, who often undergo both sterilisation and sex reassignment, the law simply allows parents to give consent. The inconsistency is glaring, and it is both ethically and legally wrong. But there's another reason non-essential surgery on intersex children is wrong, and that is that doctors choose the wrong sex to assign to with alarming frequency. In amongst the medical jargon, this slide shows the outcomes of sex reassignment on intersex children with a variety of diagnoses. Green shows how frequently the doctors and parents chose the sex the child later identified with. In other words, when the doctors performed surgery to allocate a male or a female sex to people with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, they got it right between 90 and 100% of the time. But more than 65% of the time, they got it right for intersex people with cloacal extrophy. Red shows they also got it wrong 25% of the time for intersex people with partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, and approximately 60% of the time for intersex people with 5-alpha reductase deficiency. Let that sink in. For those people, medicine's predictions weren't even right half of the time. And it's entirely possible that these statistics are an underrepresentation, because that particular study did not permit people to say, you got it wrong because I'm not male or female, I'm actually intersex. People like transgender intersex woman Noreen, who responded to that Australian survey I mentioned earlier, saying, I can't help but feel that I was mutilated and forced to become something I didn't believe myself to be, male. The scars on my body have faded, but not the ones on my mind. It's past time for medicine to accept that it's not fixing, it's breaking. It's past time for the law to acknowledge that no matter what medicine says, medical procedures affecting the sex of intersex children are not therapeutic and they should be regulated. The best approach for everyone is to leave intersex children's bodies alone and allow them to make decisions about their own bodies when they're able to do so.
Amen.
Thank you.